Welcome to Fantasy Femme Fatales, where two fantasy readers dive headfirst into the worlds of romantasy and dark romance. From fantasy deep dives to book club banter, we're talking plot, magic systems, and all the spicy details. So pour a drink, grab your latest obsession, and let's turn the page together.
Today we are wrapping up our deep dive of Anathema. We are so excited. It has been quite a journey, and let's get into it. So this is the last deep dive we're going to do, and as a little treat to wrap things up, we're going to end with like a rapid fire recap. And the idea here is to just go over some of the main plot points, where they started and where we've ended, so we can close out the book feeling really clear on all the important bits. Then we're going to dig into mine and Kara's predictions for book 2. We really know nothing, and we have a name, and Keri Lake has shared a little bit about how Zevander's past is going to come to light, but beyond that, the grand scheme of our story, we really don't know what is going to happen. So why not throw a few darts at the board and toss our predictions in the ring? So if you wrap up today's episode and you are thirsty for more, or if you're listening and it's a little down the road and you're trying to refresh yourself before Eldritch, go check out our guide to the Eating Woods and Anathema episode. It's going to refresh you on all the foundational elements of this world and how our story takes place in it. So save it, watch it later. It will be a great go-to ahead of book 2. So let's kick things off, Kara.
So part 3, it begins with Maevyth and Melantha standing in front of the Umbervale, looking out at Aleysia on the other side. Maevyth feels that something is very off and questions the intentions of everyone around her right before Melantha pushes her right into the archway into the Eating Woods. On the other side, she notices the darkness of the woods, much more bleak and monstrous than they were from the other side of the Umbervale. She notices a moon watching over her and describes it as a beacon guiding her through the darkness. As she traverses the woods, she feels like she's been tricked and gets a feeling of being watched that she just can't seem to shake. Maevyth hears her name called from a voice that sounds a lot like her sister. She almost responds when she remembers the rule of the Eating Woods. Never answer the sound of your own name. She escapes the woods and makes her way to the Bronwick house, noting that it seems abandoned. No lights, no smoke, and not a single movement. She wanders the house searching for anyone and notices signs of time gone by. Mold collecting on dishes, cobwebs on the walls, and dust on the furniture. Like an absence far longer than the week that she's been gone. Maevyth wanders back to the first floor when something strikes the back of her head, falling to the floor, and before blacking out, she notices a tall and shadowy figure looming above her. Maevyth wakes up freezing cold and finds herself confined inside of an ice box, the casket that Uncle Riften used for storing bodies before embalming them. Maevyth screams and pushes against the surface, trying to get out, feeling a brief zap of fire in her wrists before noticing a shadow walk past. His face looks to be disfigured, melting off, and his body is disfigured, reminding her of the monsters in Mr. Moreau's basement. She sees what looks to be long spider legs sticking out from his back. And just then, the lid of the box starts to open, and Maevyth, terrified of the monster, tries to keep the lid closed, but fails. Monster assaults Maevyth, and our girl fights back. He grasps her hair while she punches him until he pulls her out of the box and she falls to the floor. Maevyth frantically calls upon her magic, trying to use the bone whip, but only a pile of bones appear. She calls upon the Ares glyph, and a force of air slams him against the wall. She tries to run, but is quickly yanked back as the scorpion necklace around her neck pulls into her flesh, knocking her to the floor. We have a very horrifying incident here as well, where the pantless spider monster, Uncle Riften, tries to force himself on Maevyth and is terrifyingly close to being successful. But luckily, Maevyth grabs an embalming needle and stabs it right into his neck. Maevyth only manages a brief escape before she finds herself trapped again, when she hears a familiar voice inside her head that says, "Let me help you." She closes her eyes to blackness and then opens them and sees a haze of white clouding her vision, a spinal glyph burning into her mind. She throws out her hand and a long, bony whip lashes out, just missing his skull. I stared down at the stretch of bones that reached 5 meters in length. I drew back my arm and the bone scraped over the concrete floor, retracting back into my hand. She throws out her hand again, and this time she snaps him in the chest, his body slumping into a pile of loose skin with his head on top. She pulls the bone whip back, retracting it into her hand, and notices the spinal glyph glowing very brightly on her skin. So we got the bone whip.
Okay, now we understand what the bone whip is. I really didn't get it before, to be honest.
I understood the whip part, but the fact that it's like a 5-meter long motherfucker, like that is crazy. And I imagine her as like kind of a tiny girl. So
Mhm.
whipping that thing around is like fire. I thought that was so cool. This is really the first time we've seen her fight back at all.
It was very badass. And it like retracts into her skin like it's part of her. I thought that was like kind of
Right.
gross and cool at the same time.
So cool. Maevyth calls for her sister, and when she hears her name called back, she opens the doors of a cabinet and a body crawls out. Our beloved grandmother Agatha. She freakishly crawls toward Maevyth on all fours, and Maevyth throws out her palms, the bone whip wrapping around her neck. And that is the very end of grandmother Agatha. Karma is a fucking bitch, and I am so glad she finally got what was coming to her.
Yes.
Spiders erupt from every part of her body, and Maevyth runs for the stairs, looking back to see hundreds of them scuttling after her. She escapes the house, but notices the horde following her on top of the snow, completely swarming her. Literally my worst nightmare.
Whew.
No, thank you.
No.
Caught up in a panic and frantically trying to get them off of her, she doesn't notice when they stop moving. All of the spiders shoot into the air, and she pauses, gasping for breath, and then runs the opposite direction, right into a hard surface. She screams out of instinct, then looks up to see none other than Zevander staring down at her. He sets the swarm of spiders and the cottage on fire, with the violent flames of black and violet destroying it all. So there we have it, reunited again, our mates.
Yes.
I have some questions here, and I don't know if you were confused about this too, but Melantha wanting Maevyth so bad in the last part and like actually agreeing to take her to the Eating Woods kind of took me by surprise. I totally thought that that was going to go a different way. But why would Melantha take her back there and then just release her? It's not clear what her motive was there. And so did they think that she would just die based on Cadavros being across the Umber Veil? It just doesn't make sense. It's not adding up to me for what I thought the larger plan would be at the becoming ceremony.
Yeah, I didn't get that either, honestly. I did think that it was probably an illusion when she showed her Aleysia on the other side of the Umber Veil in the forest. And then it wasn't, but I found that very strange too. She just like pushes her through and kind of just hopes that whatever is going to happen is going to happen. It seemed strange to me that like Dolian knows the spell to get someone through the Umbra Veil, but like Melantha doesn't. She's supposed to be like this, I don't know, devious little mage, and she doesn't know, or I don't know. It struck me as odd.
It's a really good point. I didn't even really think of that. Yeah, the whole thing just didn't add up to me and kind of threw me for a loop there. I don't know how Melantha comes into this and why she would just let Maevyth go, unless she had some sort of understanding of what could be on the other side and thought Maevyth will die if she crosses the Umber Veil.
It did really make me like question some things, because if the idea is that Melantha and these other mages are trying to get the Septimere, then they needed the Bloodstone. So like someone had to go after her. So then it makes me question, like, is that really not what they're after? Do they have a different goal in mind that we aren't aware of? I think it was definitely worth taking note of, because it didn't add up. The information we were getting and how this all went down was weird. And I do have some other thoughts on this that have to do with other parts of part 3 that we can chat about.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. Also, back with the spiders again. I know last time we talked about that possibly being Branimir's sigil, but I wonder if it could actually be Cadavros' sigil, and that this plague that's taking over is manifesting as Cadavros' sigil, so to speak.
That would make sense, that like it's been transferred to Branimir. So I think it's interesting. Cadavros is an interesting character. When Maevyth meets Mortasia in Caligoria when she's doing her training, and she tells her she has to tell her something about Zevander. We talked a lot about these like kind of random moments where like a spirit or Mortasia came to Maevyth with a message that we could not decipher. And when I read this part, because the end of part 2 was the reveal of the mates. And so at this part of the story, Maevyth doesn't know they're mates, and Zevander does. And so he does go after her. But I got thinking about that message, and I think that Mortasia wanted to tell Maevyth that Zevander was her mate. Because there's like a moment where she's like, I have to tell you something about Zevander, and she actually uses his name. I think it's the only time when there's those weird moments where we actually get the name.
Yeah.
So that's my suspicion, is that one actually may have been a nice thing.
That is such a great catch because it was so intermingled with all of the other warnings. And so how are we even supposed to know that it could mean something different at that point? Like, you just kind of connect the dots and assume that it's all a warning about the same person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really good theory.
Dolian knew, and so he can't be the only one that knows. There's a comment about how, like, if mates are presented in a seer's vision, they're like not changeable. Where like other things can occur and things can shift, but like that is like always true. And so Dolian can't be the only one that would get that vision. So it makes sense that Mortasia would know. So anyway, I think maybe we sorted one of those out. One.
Yes, we've got one thing hopefully resolved in our web of other crazy things to still uncover.
That is right. So we're very happy that Zevander showed up and came to Maevyth's rescue. We were really wondering whether or not Zevander was going to tell her they're mates or not. So let's just see how that unfolds. Zevander's there. He asks Maevyth if she's okay. And Maevyth, lost in the uncertainty of how to answer that question, given all that she has just experienced in this horror of a house, she notices the wounds from the interaction with Uncle Riften and the darker wounds in her mind from the trauma of it all. And she lets out a sob, and Zevander comforts her. He drapes his cloak over her and tells her they should go back to Aethyria. But Maevyth is refusing to leave without at least trying to find her sister. She's come all this way. She needs to at least try. So they're about to share a lovely little moment with Zevander and his newly confirmed mate, who does not yet know that she is his mate. Maevyth spots this flickering light from the corner of her eye and notices the cottage across the field where the Crone witch lives. They make their way toward the cottage, examining the perimeter, seeing if she's home, and Maevyth notices some symbols carved into the wood of the door, and she runs her fingers over them and suddenly feels a sharp object against her back and a familiar voice in her ear. Our beautiful Crone witch is back, but she seems suspicious. She is not really excited to see Maevyth and says that folks have just not been what they were before these days, and asks Maevyth to turn around so she can see her face. And before she can turn around, she hears a gasp and turns around and sees Zevander appear out of nowhere behind the Crone witch with a blade at her throat. Now, Maevyth asks the witch if she remembers her, even though it's only been a couple of weeks, and the Crone witch tells her the banishing of her sister was months ago. Now, the Crone witch is confused, but she decides to just accept it as it is and invites Maevyth and Zevander inside. Can we just talk about the Crone witch for 1 second? She's back.
She's back.
We had to wait basically the entire book to see this lovely lady again, but she's back.
You had an inkling. You had an inkling.
Like, you can't bring in the Crone witch and then not bring her back, right?
She has been an obsession in our brains. Every turn of the page, we're wondering when she's going to come back.
Yeah, we love her. We love her, which is going to make this next section a little tough. Maevyth, for the first time, how rude, she asks the Crone witch what her name is. And the Crone witch tells her that her name is Elwyn. And this happens to be an Old English name that translates into elm tree. And in ancient folklore and mythology, the elm tree was considered sacred, and it represented wisdom, protection, and resilience. So elm tree, Grimswood tree, like, what a coincidence. Are we getting some little connections here, maybe? Maevyth asks what happened after the banishing, and Elwyn describes the fighting and that everyone wanted to be sure she was dead. So Morose followed her into the woods, and Elwyn waited to see if anyone came out. Later, Morose emerged with Aleysia, but Elwyn doesn't know where she is now. And Morose left town about a week later, and when he returned, everyone started getting sick and complained of spider bites, and they were changing into beasts, almost as if the spiders had burrowed into their bones and causing the village to go mad, killing and eating the living. So Maevyth asks what happened to the villagers? Like, where are they? And Elwyn says they slumber, almost like they're waiting for something. Super creepy. Maevyth tells her what she saw in the woods and how the creature swallowed Morose on the night of the banishing, which just confirms that Morose did not emerge from the woods after all. They share some stew, and Elwyn asks questions about where they came from. Zevander comments on how Elwyn spoke Nexterosi when they arrived, seeming pretty surprised by that. She tells him she's lived in Foxglove for centuries, and that language is her native tongue. So she admits to being Nilavir, and she was rejected by the Lunaseer and left her home to travel north where the Corvakai took her in. Zevander realizes that it was nearly a millennia ago that Corvus Keep was abandoned, which makes her basically the oldest Nilavir that he's ever met. She tells them how she lived with the Corvakai and that they didn't care about power or status, and they just accepted her for who she was, an Aetherian. She talks about their history, how they were forced from their home and they marched into the Crishurian Trench, and Maevyth asks if that's where the Grimswood lies. And Elwyn confirms that yes, that's correct. The priestess in the tree was made to watch her people die before she was turned into the tree in the middle of hell, consumed by the horrible creatures that dwell at the bottom of the trench. The ones in the golden armor were greedy beasts who longed to claim the vein that ran along the Corvus Keep. Sounds a lot like the Salassians we've heard about, I think. How did you survive? Zevander asks, and she says, I fled. The priestess gave me the last rose of Mortasia, the gift of the goddess herself. She smiles at Maevyth. They only bloom in Aethyria. So the princess told me to flee the mortal lands. She had seen a vision of a child who would one day avenge our people and lead a new generation of Corvakai. For centuries I waited, watching mortals war with each other and fighting for their single god. I longed to return home, and then another creature crossed over, this one vicious and vengeful. Cadavros, he called himself, former mage to the king, a ruse for what lies within him. Pastilios, the god of disease and famine, uncle to the goddess Mortasia.
We knew that Pastilios would come into play, but this kind of uncle thing, total curveball. I didn't know that gods and goddesses, just threw me for a loop.
It feels very Greek to have these almost like hierarchies of gods, but I agree. I did not see that coming. This one really struck me for a second. So good on you, Kara. You saw this one coming a mile away with this god. So she continues. The belief in the gods is not what it was, and belief is power. Without it, the gods do not truly exist. Therefore, some chose a more corporal presence, and even a god is only as powerful as the body it inhabits. Once he's acquired enough power, there's little we can do to keep him from crossing back to Aethyria. Elwyn shares a bit of a dark tale about her taking a boy from the village and trying to use him as payment to Cadavros so she could pass through the Eating Woods. But when she tried to cross, she was not worthy. She felt pulled by her arm and a burning sensation, so she had to turn back, waiting to fulfill her promise. Maevyth then realizes Elwyn was the one who left the rose in her basket, and Elwyn admits to finding her with a flock of ravens and eyes of silver. Maevyth says that her eyes are gray, not silver, and Elwyn says that her silver-eyed child would have caused such rumors, so she attempted to mask her nature. Maevyth asks, can she see their true form? But Elwyn says that only death will reveal them. So at last, Elwyn offers them a single room and encourages Maevyth and Zevander to get some rest.
Damn.
I love the name Elwyn. Can we just say that? It is very beautiful.
It feels very elven.
It does. It does. It's a very sweet name, but also the connections to protection and wisdom and the tree, it all feels very intentional. I thought this whole section with the Crone Witch and finally getting some backstory on her and Cadavros and Mortasia was amazing. I feel like we have just waited for it, but it does have me feeling some pretty weird things, especially with this whole uncle situation. The fact that death, famine, and pestilence are not happy things, and they're connected to the god of chaos and fire. It's got me worried if we're rooting for the bad guys here, Kara. He's her uncle. And on the flip side, we've got a god of alchemy and immortality, which like they don't seem that bad to me, you know?
Right. I know. You know what? I agree. This is starting to feel like we're trudging into bad guy villainous territory. I wonder if we're like meant to think a little bit less good guy, bad guy. Like when I think of, for example, our world, things that exist naturally like chaos, death, famine, plague, like those are all things that just exist. It's just a part of our world, right?
Mhm.
So I wonder if that's what Keri Lake is playing at. Like, I wonder if it's more about the balance of
Mhm.
things like Magikai and his followers and Pastilios and Cadavros. This is kind of one of my predictions in for the next book, but I wonder if Maevyth is going to be the one to rebalance the scales as
Mhm.
opposed to being a bad guy. Like maybe she'll be the one that kind of breaks out of that. It remains to be seen because you're absolutely right. Like none of this is sounding good.
The background that we got out of the book has really like skewed our vision of, you know, there's a bit of an underdog story, it kind of feels like. But I think that you're right. I think that seeing things in the gray feels very connected to the story, not seeing like good and evil, but seeing things a little blurry. I wonder if there's a theme of justice around this as well, because it does seem, like you said, the power dynamics that are going on in Mortasia and in Aethyria are really out of whack. Even the villagers are like not being fed. They're almost going through a famine already, and it's at the king's hands. And so maybe that is really the motive of these gods, that justice needs to come forward and rebalance the scales, like you said. And sometimes that means bad things happen.
Love that. Yeah, I could totally see that being a theme because you're right. The Nilivir are already suffering. And even if you think of the Red God and whatever was in Mortasia previously before Cadavros' famine took over, it's never been a great place to be and live. It's never been a thriving community. So I think you could be onto something there.
Yeah, and like the Salassians, who are brutal warriors, have been given these powers to push people down. Like that, we've seen that in various ways as well.
Mm-hmm.
We heard a little bit about these gods and the battle. Elwyn references basically the Salassians and how they came and they pushed out the Corvakai people. And it made me wonder how the Lunasir came to be, because we know how the Salassians were created, but I don't think it's been shared with us how the Lunasir were created. We know the Salassians were created by Magikai to exact revenge against Deimos. Could it be possible that the Lunasir were created by Pastilios or Morsana or one of these other gods to like provide that counterbalance?
I think you're absolutely right. I feel like there's so much that alludes to Maevyth being Lunasir. Like, if you think back to all the moments in the book that have alluded to the moon being evolved, the crescent moon, on the book Dolian gave her, even just in the last part of the moon being her beacon, like through the Eating Woods, I think that Maevyth could possibly be a Lunasir. I don't know how that comes together. But to
Yeah.
your point, I think another god created the Lunasirs, possibly out of rebellion against Magikai for creating the Salassians potentially. It would almost make sense that it would be Morsana. Just thinking back to the Corvakai book and Magikai making the Salassians, maybe in retaliation, she hit back with creating the Lunasirs.
Yeah, I love that. I think so too. I think there's something that hasn't been said yet that we need to hear more about, because I was thinking the same thing about Maevyth, especially that moon comment and the fact that she has like a sigil on the back of her neck, and they've made comments about that sigil like catches the light of the moon and it powers them. And I went back and I was like, was there anything in the book? Did I miss something? And her and Rakaya talk about that sigil, and she's just kind of like, what did you feel when you felt it come on? And she was having thoughts and feelings about Zevander. So it doesn't give us anything there, but it seems like there's some consistency. I got thinking about her eye in this moment too, how she has like the little like dip in her eye. I hadn't realized before that she basically escaped death, right? In the first part of the book, she dies for 8 minutes and then she wakes up and she has a little moon under her eye. And so it's almost like she had that moment with death, but maybe it just didn't stick. So it didn't cure the veil that Elwyn put over her, but still, interestingly, it appears as like a little crescent.
That's such a good connection. I didn't even think of. 100%. Like, I guess in our minds, we just knew that she went through some sort of strange transformation at the time, but you're absolutely right. She was cheating death, and it was just that veil slipping a little bit to leave that bit of silver in her eye. So that's cool.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting was when the Crone witch said that the Corvicae don't care about status and power. And so, again, could that be alluding to the power that it seems like everyone else wants in some way, right? We've got the king with the Vivicantum, Cadavros, Pastilios, and possibly even Magicae, the red god. It feels like it's all a theme that's kind of being woven throughout Anathema. I don't know what it necessarily means yet, but I'm just planting the seed now. If we think of, Maevyth and her role, potentially it is to, again, be that rebalancing thing because she manifests Morsana and what the Corvicae believed in to care about status and power, where it seems like that's what everyone else cares about and the king's motive. So just some food for thought. I really think that that's going to come back.
Yeah, I love that note too. There was something in this for me that kind of made me feel like, are the Corvicae like kind of a reference to like the original people or like indigenous people? It seems like they had a real connection to the land, and even this idea of like not being focused on power and status and allowing someone to come in and just be part of their community, but then having people take advantage of them. It just kind of felt like, I wonder if there is a bigger message around how we have existed as people and how it exists in this world too.
I love that connection. I think you're probably right. I can see a lot of that threading in, and I feel like Keri Lake has done that throughout the book with different issues as well. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a reference for her.
Yeah.
It is officially time for a little bit of forced proximity with Zevander and Maevyth, and I am ready. So Maevyth and Zevander head into their little room, their single room in the Crone Witch's abode, and undress privately. Maevyth catches a glimpse of Zevander's back, riddled with scars from the Salassians' brutal torture, and an enormous scorpion tattoo covering his back. As Maevyth undresses, she notices the cut on her arm that Zevander touched had already healed and that she had no more spider bites. Zevander comments on her own scars and remarks, "Someone struck you." Maevyth responds, "It seems my mouth got me in trouble." The banter in this part was insane. It was crazy. And just the little looks back and forth when they were undressing was enough to give me chills.
Yes.
It was so good. They both climb into bed together. In case you guys haven't caught on that they are together in bed, they are. Yeah. And we're excited.
Yeah, our little mates.
Yes. So they both climb into bed. Zevander notices Maevyth's hesitations and is pleased when she admits that she has never shared a bed with a man before. They share another playful conversation, and Zevander teases Maevyth about snoring the night he visited the Bronwick home. He let out a chuckle, and it was then I realized that it was the first time I'd really heard him laugh. The sound, so deep and unexpected, distracted me from my own. Zevander moves in for a cuddle, offering his heat to keep Maevyth warm. How small and safe I felt beside him. Like nothing and no one could possibly touch me, except Zevander.
Yeah. Yeah. And no one can, Maevyth. Just to be clear, like, no.
Yes, this is definitely a touch her and die situation. Zevander is not having any of it.
Yeah.
So things really start to heat up with some flirty banter. Maevyth is feeling poked at, literally and figuratively. She gets a little bit weird and decides to sleep by the hearth. But before she can leave, strong arms grab at her waist, pulling her into the bed and caging her in. Maevyth tries to break free as he whispers, "I didn't mean to upset you. You're a vicious little rosebud. 1 minute you're soft and inviting, the next you're thorns and blood." My God.
Can we just take a minute to talk about how awkward Maevyth is, though? And like, oh, I'm just going to go sleep by the hearth. Like, what a child, Maevyth. Come on.
Right? Like you're caged in. You're caged in with Zevander. Like what more can you ask for?
You've been begging. You've been begging for this.
Despite everything, she's still awkward and runs off. So it's cute. We kind of love that. I feel like the awkwardness you don't really see in a lot of FMCs and just like how things heat up. So I think it is kind of an organic, a lot of us experience especially if it would be our first time in bed with a man, to be fair.
Yeah, and I do love that she's honest with him. She's awkward about it, but she's not going to hide it. So I do love her for that.
Right.
Yeah, take me or leave me.
Next, Zevander goes in for a kiss, and Maevyth softens underneath him. Dizziness swept over me, and I opened my eyes, worried that I might faint. Shadowy wisps danced around us, burrowing in and out of my flesh in pleasurable bursts, and I moaned, the sound vibrating against our joined lips. Heat surged beneath my skin and across my palms. I pushed against his chest to sever the kiss, and in resting my hand there, felt the rhythm of his heart beating in time to mine. The cadence of it calmed me, and I could feel myself growing weak, floating, lifting out of my body. Things continue to get extremely hot and heavy, and as things progress, they notice black flames dancing along the bed frame. Maevyth opens her eyes and finds the ceiling closer than before as she hovers in the air with flickering black flames crackling around her. I actually wanted to scream at this point. It was so good. This was so good. We spared our listeners a lot of the nitty-gritty details, but I am fully obsessed with them finally coming together. And I love that Zevander is really the only one that knows the magnitude of this situation.
Yes, but he's also just like owning it, like it's like he's just going to go for it because like he has the information he needed, but I need to know what the hell is going on and why Maevyth keeps levitating. Like, I don't get it.
I know. It's like, again, it goes back to, is this supposed to be scary or sexy? Like, I'm really having a hard time connecting these two. I think it's because Morsana and Deimos are coming together and there's some like sparks flying there, some ethereal sparks flying. I don't know, but remains to be seen. As she unravels, she's triggered by old memories and feelings of worthlessness caused by years of rejection in Foxglove Parish, contrasting these feelings with Zevander, making her feel seen and worthy. Her insecurities make her question him, knowing that every person she's grown to love has been torn away from her. But she settles herself, knowing that it's better to have experienced that passion and watched it fade like a dying star than to have never known it at all. It's cute. The conversation shifts to the window Maevyth broke with her scream. And Zevander comments on the familiarity of it from the night with the ambrosier liquor and watching Maevyth in the throes of chaos. Don't worry, Zevander. We remember too. It was a big moment.
Yeah, Maevyth doesn't, but we do.
We do, baby. Zevander references his pain that seems to be connected to the restraint we heard about earlier on in the book. Maevyth tries to touch him, to soothe him, and he pulls away, sharing how much he wants her, but not allowing himself to go there. As Maevyth falls asleep, Zevander looks to her, his mate. Mates were for those who believed in fate, who gazed at the stars with a longing to capture them. He lived too long with the practicality of knowing the stars were too far out of reach, and yet in his arms lay the brightest of them all, the girl with the moon in her eyes and a fire in her soul. Damn the gods for sending him one so beautiful with a heart so pure, so fragile. He reflects on Dolian's vision, knowing that it was indisputable. Mates were always true, and the first kiss in his office had laid all doubt to rest. He had felt a tug on the bond, the shaking in his bones that weakened the possessive beast inside of him. I was hoping to see some of their love form, and I cannot believe we actually got this moment amongst all of this craziness. Like, now does not feel like the time to be fooling around in the Crone Witch's hovel, and there's like beasts everywhere.
They couldn't wait, and they were all over each other. I really love that we got those moments of vulnerability, even though they were mostly internal, like these thoughts and feelings, and Zevander really reflecting on like life and what it means now to have a mate. I think it's very sweet. It's very fair. Have your fears. And I do also like this thing he put on the table about how he feels for Maevyth and the fact that he might go down this terrible road with the curse, but at the same time, he's fearing for himself that he's mated to a mortal who clearly is not going to live as long as Zevander if he's able to cure the curse. It feels like a very fair thing to be sad about, is either of you having to deal with life without each other now.
True, but maybe there is a world in which Maevyth magically becomes immortal.
Yes.
I'm putting it out there.
Yes.
I'm putting it out there. Weirder things have happened in this book.
We would love that. Zevander pulls away from the bed. An image appears in his mind. It's of the window, the porch, and a figure standing by the window. He could see long antlers, a hunched body, and hooves. I see you watching me, A voice says in his mind, "Come, I wish to speak with you." The creature steps before the bedroom window. His eyes glowed like that of an animal in the dark. The same beastly form he'd seen in the woods when he first ventured to Mortasia. Cadavros.
Dun dun dun. He's back.
Here he is, talking to Zevander in his mind. He says, "You've taken to the black flame rather well over the years. Far better than I." Zevander quickly tries to put his mental shield in place, but since Cadavros cursed him, he tells Zevander that he can't hide his thoughts. So Cadavros offers him a bargain. As the black pestilence spreads, his power also grows. So he asks for his loyalty, fealty, and in return, Zevander can stand by his side to rule Mortasia. He also mentions that if Prince Dorjan dies, a black plague will be unleashed, and all of Aethyria will be at his mercy. And the prince and Cadavros are also linked. So if he dies, the prince also dies. And this is the reason the king banished Cadavros rather than killing him, and why he forbade anyone from crossing the Umbra Vale. His son's life had been soulbound, not just to the amulet, but to Cadavros himself. Well, shit. Isn't that great?
Amazing.
Amazing. Zevander rejects his offer, saying that he needs nothing. He needs nothing from Cadavros. But Cadavros looks over at Maevyth and says he can offer Zevander all of her without the pain, whatever that means. Cadavros pulls Zevander into a dark and steamy vision. Maevyth is there, fulfilling all of Zevander's fantasies, until something commands him to kill her and he can't stop himself. The voice commands Zevander to give his loyalty, or he will take everything that matters to him. Zevander is trapped in this nightmare. He's torn between pleasure and torture and unable to restrain himself from all of his horrible fantasies. Then Maevyth transforms into General Lois, taunting him and torturing him once again. This was rough. This was rough to witness. I don't know how you felt about it, but I was really feeling for Zevander.
Yeah, the SA themes in this are really hard to get through, and I just think it's such a dirty move by Cadavros to manipulate his memories with his biggest trauma and his biggest weakness at the same time. That's just the cruelest of the cruel.
Very. And we absolutely boiled this down into a very simple summary. In the meantime, Maevyth is awakened by these strange movements and sounds, and she notices Zevander convulsing, and his eyes have turned black as coal. She touches his skin and feels a searing heat on her fingertips. So she runs to find Elowen and begs for her help. The Crone Witch assesses Zevander and recognizes his state as abyssal binding. Something has gripped his mind and refuses to release him. It happens when you slip into a state of Caligoria. Elowen says there's no way to stop it, but they need to bring his fever down. Maevyth suggests she might be able to control the black flame that's causing the fever. And once again, someone dismisses Maevyth as if she's useless. Thank you, Crone Witch. We thought you were a fan, but no. The Crone Witch fetches water, and Maevyth tries to cool his skin while the Crone Witch heads to the forest, and she goes to grab some herbs. We got something real big in this section. So Cadavros and the prince are linked. If he dies, the prince dies, and they are connected. I have had 700 theories throughout this deep dive experience, but I am pretty sure that this was one of them.
I remember you mentioning specifically around the amulet and if there was more to it than what we had learned. So yeah, this was a crazy one.
My prediction was kind of if there's one amulet, could there be more? And, we've been asking, what's in it for Cadavros? Why would he have made this amulet? Now we know. We know that Cadavros is actually the god of Pestilios that obviously wants famine and plague to go across the land. So we get what's in it for him now. I think we need to learn how this all went down and how exactly this soul binding thing happened. Why would it have ever made sense for the king to make this deal with Cadavros? I just can't figure it out. It doesn't actually seem like there's anything in it for him aside from vengeance. If his son happens to die, why would you have made a bargain that protects your son from dying? Not a bargain that is an outcome if and when he does die.
I knew there was some sort of bargain going on here, but yeah, I can't figure out why either. I know I had thought it could have to do with the vein, Vivicantum, potentially at least why he decided to keep Cadavros alive throughout this whole thing. Like, if this is how crazy it could be if the prince actually dies and the pestilence unleashes, I can only imagine what the king gets in return for this type of bargain. Maybe it's to keep him in power. Like, it could be something like that.
Yeah. I think we need to know more. Hopefully we will get
Totally.
more in the next book. Did you also catch that Cadavros offers Zevander a place by his side to rule Mortasia? Why not Aethyria? You would think that his like overarching goal would be to take over like all of the lands.
We still don't even really know exactly how and why he wants Zevander. Like, we just know that he does, or the god of chaos in some way, right? I mean, the clear reason could be that he's taken well, in terms of Zevander, has taken well to the Sable Fire. He does say that when he first sees Zevander again. And so maybe that Cadavros sees that as a strength, because he was kind of an anomaly when he was initially cursed by Cadavros. That all makes sense to me, but like, the Mortasia thing is so interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too how that kind of dates back to the rumors that people in Aethyria thought of Mortasia as well.
Yeah, and also Dolian's vision. Dolian had a vision of Zevander by Cadavros' side, and that was what kind of led him to connect the dots on Maevyth and Zevander being mates, and him realizing that she can't die because that's the only reason that he will choose good, because otherwise he kind of has nothing to live for.
This is like out there, and I don't know how this comes to be, but does Cadavros evoke the vision of General Lois because he can read all of Zevander's thoughts and has access to his past trauma, or is there more to it than that? We still don't even know how Zevander ended up in the hands of General Lois necessarily. And we don't know why Zevander was tortured. Was it because he was an enemy of the Salassians? Could there be more to it? Could there have been another bargain? I feel like Cadavros just goes around like slinging all these bargains. And so I imagine he's got quite a twisted web at this point. Cadavros could have some sort of vested interest in how Zevander wields Sable Fire, and maybe that was part of why he was tortured by the Salassians. What is the motive behind all of that? We just don't know.
Yeah, I think those are some good theories there. It's unique to be able to wield Sable Fire. Even if they could play with that magic, they just can't wield it. And some of the history, back to that story, the Salassians were created by Magicae to get back at Deimos. So I do agree. I think there is like a link between these like old dark gods and the Salassians. They became kind of like their army to try to beat out Mortasia and Deimos and the battles that they were waging to try to like protect the land.
There's so many different directions that it could go. Like, it could just be Magicae wanted to torture Deimos for stealing his girl. Like, there's just so many different things. I feel like Keri Lake is sending us down that direction. Book 2, I'm sure it will shed a little bit more light on what happened, at least pre-book 1, because we're just kind of making assumptions on the relationship of the gods based on like one excerpt that we saw in Maevyth's book, essentially.
Yeah, the story's been very Corvacae driven in terms of that bloodline and what their history is. So I'm hopeful that we get more of that background in the next book. I did want to talk briefly about Zevander's pain and him rejecting Maevyth, because we see that a lot in this section of the book. I don't really understand it. I remember it first coming up, and I interpreted when he was like in the bathtub and he talks about how he hasn't been with anyone for a while, that it felt like restraint, like a choice. And we heard about the polls at that time. But now in this part of the story, it's feeling different. And I don't know if it's that he is physically feeling pain when someone touches him, or if it's a trauma response and he can't stand those interactions because of all that he's been through. So I just kind of wanted to see what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Cadavro said it himself. He can give him Maevyth without the pain.
Yeah.
And so it could be taken as figuratively his trauma is impacting his ability to like open up and be vulnerable with someone after all these years. But I did find it interesting that Cadavros alluded to being able to take away that pain. And so I do wonder if there is some sort of like visceral or physical thing going on with Zevander. Like, maybe his curse is a little bit deeper than we know in that way.
Yeah. I think it's worth paying attention to. I think we're going to see what Maevyth can do with the, limitations she has, and how she may be able to inch her way in a little bit.
Just add that other thing to the docket of the 10,000 things we need to pay attention to because there's so many. Back to Zevander seizing up at the Crone witch's house. Elwyn is gone for a while, and Maevyth starts to worry. She throws on some clothes and heads into the forest. As she's searching for Elwyn, Maevyth spots drops of blood around the snow and finds the witch completely unresponsive and bite marks. Then her eyes shoot open, dilated, before she transforms into a monster and begins chasing her. Great. The return of the Crone witch was so short-lived, and I truly actually thought she would play a bigger part.
This was harsh. This was so harsh.
Right? It was like dangling a carrot in front of our face, a Crone witch carrot, and then it was snatched away.
Into a gross, ugly carrot that turns into a monster.
Right? Honestly, traumatic. The Crone witch slash monster manages to get Maevyth on the ground as Maevyth spots an image carved into a tree. Two bird eyes opposite each other and inverted like a mirror image, almost like a glyph. She stares at it, unable to look away, studying it, and notices that time slows around her. Heat burns her palm, and light strikes her eyes. Then time leaps back into motion. A blackness crawls from her knuckles to her fingers and wraps around the Crone witch's throat, tightening and tightening until she crumbles into black dust. Maevyth looks at her fingers, still black as onyx, and finds a new glyph on her palm, the ridge of each making a scythe, a symbol for death. So we're getting some major death glyph action here. That's exciting. We've got a pretty big badass glyph now.
Yeah, and rest in peace, Elwyn, you poor tragic soul. You waited hundreds of years for Maevyth, only for her to kind of figure her shit out, and now you're dust.
She did like play a little bit of a bigger part in the plot than just in the beginning. Like we did get her to come back and tell us some of the lore, but I was kind of thinking she would help lead the charge in the war that I'm sure we're going to get as part of this plague.
I really wanted her glow up. Like, I just wanted her to become like a beautiful, like, release the veil, show us who you really are, and you're just like a beautiful young woman. But no, she is a monster slash dust in the wind. So this was devastating.
Right. It was devastating, and poor Maevyth had to be the one to kill the poor Crone witch. Moments later, she sees two more monsters running toward her, and she runs until she can't run anymore. She makes it to the cottage, locking the door behind her, and hears the monsters circling on the porch. A wind swirls around her, and she looks outside to find the monsters far from the door, as if they can't approach, warded by the symbols that had been carved into the door. In the depths of Caligoria, Zevander hears Maevyth's voice. She's begging him to wake up. He looks for her but can't place the voice. Then his nightmare transforms again, showing Maevyth hurt, and he's unable to help her. Lois taunts him. If you didn't enjoy what I did to you, then why did you give me your seed? He hears Maevyth's soft voice again, and his nightmare changes to show Maevyth dead at his own hands. She calls for him, begging for him to come back, begging him to open his eyes, and the violence in him calms, and he opens his eyes to find Maevyth staring down at him, their palms pressed together and eyes glowing silver. Maevyth commands the flame and pulls Zevander out of the abyssal bind. Zevander is in a state of panic, and Maevyth reassures him that he didn't hurt her. He didn't even touch her. Zevander pulls Maevyth into an embrace, holding so tightly like he's afraid to let her go, afraid that he might still be trapped in that hellish space. They kiss and entangle in each other, but again, Zevander pulls back from her. He tells her he is hers to touch, and he craves her more than his next breath, but he saw horrible things that he can't get out of his head. Things that he can still feel as if they live inside him. Things that he could never speak out loud. Maevyth admits to seeing his scars when the Crone witch undresses him, and he briefly shares the trauma he experienced. He talks about being trapped in the dark space and how he fears that his head is no longer safe, that the darkness is turning him. Just like it did to Branimir. Maevyth reassures him that no matter what, she will grab the rope with both hands and pull him back from the darkness and never let go. Like a cute mate would.
Maevyth, getting all confident and protective. We love it.
We're seeing the love. Zevander takes note of Maevyth's blackened fingers, and she tells him about her ending the Crone witch and how it made her feel like a monster. She's afraid to touch him and hurt him like she did to the Crone witch. The will of the wielder, Maevyth, he says to her. Magic only works at your will. Remember that. Never fear your power. They get all tangled up in each other once again, and this time he lets her touch him. She looks down to see a silvery band of light where her hands meet him. The heat spirals up her wrist, creating black ribbons of flame, and his power pulls to him like tiny threads tugging at her womb. Things escalate, and they try a few new things, if you know what I mean. And Maevyth once again speaks the god's language when Zevander finally claims her. He says, "You are mine, Moon Witch, for all eternity and whatever lies beyond it. No soul has ever been more intricately woven into mine than yours." Cute. The lovers lay their plans for the next day to head to Calixar, to safety and to hide from the king. Then they discuss Cadavros. If it's true that he embodies Pastilios, then he yearns for chaos and the power to control life and death. Maevyth heads to the kitchen to get them some food, and on the way notices a quiet creak of the floor, noticing a loose board from beneath her feet. She pulls back the carpet, noticing a section of the floor that looks almost like a trap door. And as she pulls the fire lamp over the opening, she notices something on the ground, a body. Peering down into the crawl space, my heart caught in my throat as a needling shock crawled over me. There, curled into herself, lay my sister, Aleysia.
Aleysia.
I can't even believe it. Let's back up a minute, though, because we are finally getting some badass Maevyth hitting her first bone whiff and learning the death glyph all in part 3. Wild. She's powerful as fuck. Obsessed.
I love her. Like, she's got like almost like tattooed fingers because of the glyph. She's got this like darkness on her fingers. I'm into it.
Yeah, it's so badass. I was very worried in the beginning that we were just going to get this like Ares glyph and that was going to be the end of it as like a major glyph for her. But it sounds like she's got 3 major glyphs.
True. And I think there's going to be more. I also love that the glyph was just on the tree. Like someone left it there for her. Who could that have been? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the Crone Witch. Maybe she was like, I'm about to die. Let's give Maevyth something that she needs. This was wild, and just the way we got this like amazing smutty ending. I really didn't think we were going to get anything. I thought that we were just going to dive into chaos. So I loved this, but somehow it also ended on an intense cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Like, wild. Go off, Keri Lake, I guess.
It's very unfortunate that our lovely little Crone Witch had to die before we found out she was hiding Aleysia in the basement. We have so many questions. She totally skirted it. She full on lied. Oh, I don't know where she could have ended up. She's in your basement. Like, I'm pretty sure you know she's down there.
Did she have her in her basement to protect her? If that's the case, why wouldn't she have just told Maevyth? Like, what else is she hiding?
Exactly. I mean, I am worried about the state that Aleysia is going to be in when we find her, because it feels like she was like a prisoner. She was like saving her for like a bargaining chip, like she did with the boy she took from the village. It didn't work last time, but maybe she decided to take the last kind of capable human in case things got desperate and she needed to like fight back against Cadavros.
That is terrifying. And also, how did she end up in the Crone Witch's hands after being seen with Mr. Moreau / Cadavros? I'd like to know what happened to lead up to her being under the Crone Witch's floorboards in the beginning.
If I was just throwing out a theory, the way that the Crone Witch talks in that scene is that she saw everything go down and like Morose went in and she was like standing by to watch to see who came out. It's very possible that she saw Aleysia there struggling for help after Maevyth crossed over and she was able to kind of like rescue her. And then from there, who knows what happens. When Dolian and Maevyth and Allura did the scrying with the mirror and stuff, Maevyth saw a vision of her sister by like a hearth. So at that point, she was like, I think she's alive. And I think at that point, we were like, Crone Witch? Could it be the Crone Witch? But I don't feel good about this. I just don't feel good about what the Crone Witch did.
No, I know. And there's got to be more to the story. Like, I did feel like she was a good person at first. I really want to believe that she is. So, you know what? We're still Team Crone Witch. There's got to be an explanation.
I mean, it's okay for her to live in the gray too. It's a crazy mixed up world and like she's got to survive too.
Yep.
But I have a question. Is Aleysia still pregnant? Like, I'm scared to say that out loud, but like, I kind of hope she's not. Cause I just feel like if you've been through all this for these like last few months, you'd be like real pregnant also. So I don't know, TBD on that, but
TBD how she like ends up in this story. I really thought that she was just going to be like a catalyst for the beginning of the story. So the fact that she's still alive.
I'm scared. Like, she might be a monster. I'm not feeling great about this storyline, and I wasn't happy to see her. Like, I was kind of like, aren't we past this? Like, I want it to be about all the other stuff.
Same. Yeah, I know. I kind of want Maevyth to just like leave that part of her life behind and just like go move on and be the new Mrs. Lady Redane. Like, that's what you're doing now. Like, fuck Aleysia, goodbye.
Do you think Rakaya is going to put up with having to compete for attention? No, she's not going to like that at all.
You make a good point there. I wonder how that will come to be. I don't think Rakaya is one to share.
No, and like I could see Aleysia being like a bit of a Nesta about the situation, like holier than thou, not into like all of the things that Maevyth has just like fallen in love with on the other side of the Umbra Veil. We'll see. Who knows? She could be so many things. I did think the whole thing with Maevyth and her death glyph was super cool. The fact that she is like a descendant of the goddess of death, and so for her to have, like you said, the bone whip now, which is like way more lethal than I ever imagined it to be. And now this death glyph that is like literally touch you and die is very cool. It got me thinking about Zevander's dark flames and Maevyth's darkness and these things and how each of their energies call to each other. And we've kind of like seen these interactions. And so it made me feel like maybe Maevyth's energy and darkness is now really blooming like a black rose, maybe. These two energies are really like finding each other and like building off of each other. And I have a little theory. It's in my predictions, so we'll get to that. But
I am excited. I am so pumped to hear the predictions.
Question, Kara. In Zevander's nightmare, General Lois says, if you didn't like it, then why did you give me your seed? And the first time I read this line, I was like, okay, she's being emotionally abusive and just kind of talking, you know, the things that people say. Mm-hmm. When I read it over again, I got really worried for a second that like, could Zevander have like impregnated General Lois? Like when we talk about a seed, it got me thinking like offspring. And that's terrifying on its own. Then I got thinking about whether if Zevander had a baby, would it carry his curse as well? Or would it be like constrained to just him?
I would not have ever thought about the seed there. He could very well have had a baby with this creepy General Lois woman. I always see her as like a big broody type. But your point on carrying the curse, I don't see how he wouldn't. I wonder if, and again, Dolian had this vision of this son. And so if that's with Maevyth, I wonder how Maevyth's powers and Zevander's powers coming together, like, do they nullify the curse? Do they transform it into something else? I don't know. So yeah, a lot of questions. Now we have to worry about another person being pregnant, possibly.
Like General Lois is like obsessed with Zevander. We saw that at the ball, like at the becoming ceremony, how like she is just like so obsessed with him that it really did get me scared. Like, he wants to just do whatever she can to hang on to him and continue to like ruin his life. So this was like a scary little rabbit hole that I went down.
It's not the craziest thing that we've heard. Like apparently Maevyth has a twin. We can't forget about that. We're going to have to start our little thread board at this point, Sarah, because I think like everything that we're getting from these last two parts is definitely warranting one of those thread boards.
Yeah, I think that in our near-ish future, maybe ahead of Eldritch, once we get a firm date on it, we should do like a revisit episode where we go through some of our predictions just from this book, where we can say like confirmed or like we were way off the mark on that, and then like what's left and like what will we have to come back to in the next two books and see what we got, see what we didn't.
Yay!
I think that would be fun. If our listeners have any theories that we missed, if that's possible, please send them to us because we will fully add you into our little list and we will chat through them and give you credit where credit's due. I'm sure you guys caught things that we didn't. our book. So I thought we would recap the main plot points, where we started and where we've landed, because so much has happened in this book. If you don't have it in you to listen to all these episodes again before the next book comes out, save this episode and you'll have a nice little refresher to come back to so you can get in the right space for Eldritch. So we're going to go character by character. So we have Maevyth, who is not dead. And that was like the vibe for all of part one. So I felt like that was worth saying. We do know that Maevyth is in fact not dead. She's a descendant of the Corvi people and the goddess of death. She unintentionally had a death baptism with a bird, and she now has Ravox, the giant badass dragon bird, who, God, I hope we'll see in book 2. We better. Oh my God. We were getting like Crone witch energy with Ravox in this book, I have to say. It was like very few and far between, and I need to see more of Ravox.
Same. I feel like he's going to have some really badass moments in Eldritch. He better, at least.
I agree. I think he's got to have a big role. So then we have our shadow daddy Zevander, who is our 200-ish year old lunaseer who is cursed in all of the ways that one really can be cursed. Physically, his body is cursed, but also Cadavros cursed his future by interfering with his family. And you could say that Zevander was also cursed by the Selasians, given the fact that he was tormented and all of the trauma that they caused him. Zevander and Maevyth are mates. That has been confirmed, and after quite a rocky road over hundreds of pages, they have found each other and admitted their feelings. We can't talk about this book without talking about Cadavros and all of the mystery around him, and creating an amulet for the king, which was tied to the prince's life, but also his own life. So if either of them die, Plague of Pestilence will be released, and we don't really know how this came to be or why. The king did not kill Cadavros because he couldn't, but instead he banished him and hoped that he'd stay away or have no access to Vivicantum and be unable to survive. And in doing so, the Eating Woods were born. Now, little did the king know, Cadavros is actually just a cadaver being occupied by Pestilios, the god of pestilence and famine. So obviously, a god is not going to stay away just because you want him to, but we know where he resides. So this old god has been busy and appears to be building an army of monsters in Foxglove after finding the vein of Vivicantum. He is spreading a spider-infested sickness around Mortasia and is planning to use that army to rule all of the land of Mortasia. Now, Zevander and Maevyth's maidish magic seem to have warded off his abyssal binding once, but we know that Cadavros wants Zevander for his army, and they've got a bit of a like Harry Potter versus Voldemort kind of kindred connection going on here through the curse. Cadavros can read Zevander's thoughts and then trap his mind. So who knows what else Cadavros can do to Zevander. Now, Dolian, Kara's best friend,
still don't know how to feel about him.
He's a real mystery, and we don't know where he's ended up. We weren't really told at the end of this book. We are hoping that he is with Rakaya in Rivendell. Calixar. Dolian had a vision a long time ago that pestilence and famine were coming. And the answer to it in Zevander's curse was a septimere, or a wand, or a magical object that's strong enough to kill Cadavros, who was seen in these visions leading a dark plague. But Dolian changed his mind when he realized that the last piece of the septimere puzzle was the descendant of the Corvicae people, who had long been thought to be extinct. And who wants that blood on their hands? So he instead decided to put all bets on Maevyth, secretly knowing that she was Zevander's mate, and likely the daughter of the goddess of death. He seems to have a unique understanding of the Corvi people that most people don't have, and he has been dedicated to uncovering their history and how they might use it to protect Maevyth and hopefully all of Aethyria. However, Dolian has not been the most reliable resource, so it's yet to be seen if he actually has a plan and whether that plan has a chance of working at all. We also have the Magistroli, the Mage Lord Akmiros, who I think is toast. Literally, I think he's gone, based on the sacrifice ceremony that he attempted with Maevyth. And then we have Melantha, our questionable lady mage. And the last time we saw her, she was on the other side of the Umbra Veil. And from there, we don't really know where she went, what she's doing. As far as we know, this group of mages are moving swiftly to have the septimere created based on their own agenda. to destroy Cadavros and strengthen the Umbra Veil, which is only possible by securing the Septimere, which requires the blood of a Corvicae person. Now, that sounds kind of positive. I think we've kind of come around on whether these guys are good or bad. It sounds like everyone actually kind of like wants the same thing. However, as we've said before, Melantha does not seem like one to be trusted. And I think that she's probably our biggest wild card in the story and the overarching plot. Like how she is going to fall into place with things, I think will be very telling. Then we have our old gods. Now, in this book, we are only given 5 gods. I'm very curious to see if there will be more that show up in Eldritch. In this book, we met Mortasia, the goddess of death who fell in love with a mortal, Deimos, a warrior who was turned into the god of chaos and fire. We have not met Deimos yet. We have just heard a whole lot about him. We are getting an inkling about Pestilios, the god of pestilence and famine, and Magicae, the god of alchemy and immortality. But we haven't met these two yet either. We also have a third god that Kara has mentioned a few times because she's been paying attention, Aethyria, goddess of fertility. We haven't heard anything about this god, but she is referenced in the beginning of the book in the glossary section. We know that she's going to fold in at some point. Now, unfortunately, we lost the Crone Witch tonight, which was super sad. And Ravox is off somewhere. We're hoping that he's just waiting for his time to shine so he can save Maevyth once again. And we have poor Branimir, who is locked in the dungeon back at Eidolon. And hopefully Magda has been feeding him while everyone's been away, because otherwise, who knows what's going on down there. And so I think that's it. There's a lot left unclear as we finish up this book. Kara, what do you think? Anything that needs to be added in there?
I think the only thing that came to mind when you were describing the goddesses was there was this goddess of foresight or something mentioned by Magicae.
Okay.
Randomly, like when they were doing their whole ceremony amongst Maevyth and trying to like extract or tame the Sablefire, that god does not exist in the glossary. So I have no idea if that's ever going to come back into play, but I thought that was weird.
Mm-hmm.
So it might just be something to note that throughout this ceremony, these Magicae followers called upon the goddess of foresight.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, the god of death on the mortal side, Seides, is not in the glossary.
Yeah, true.
So questionable. Questionable in terms of real gods. We had our questions and we continue to question. It's kind of crazy. I feel like when we recap how everyone's story has evolved through the book, like it doesn't sound like as much as really went on.
That was a really good summary. I think you distilled it really nicely considering the emotional roller coaster that we went on for all of that to occur.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into some predictions. This is really like our golden opportunity to see what we can crack before we get this book. And hopefully it won't be months. It won't be too long before we get it. I'm going to throw some things out here. I just want you to be ready because I don't know what you've got on your card, but okay. I think that Maevyth could be the child of Mortasia and Deimos. I think that like maybe Mortasia was pregnant when she was taken by Magicae. And because she was able to escape, she has now found a way to bring their child forward to fulfill the Corvi prophecy. And like when I say pregnant, I want to, imagine it as some sort of like magical kind of situation where like the timeline doesn't add up, but like Maevyth truly is the child of these two. We have Deimos, who was immortal, that was turned into the god of chaos and fire, which has a very strong connection to Maevyth. And then we have Mortasia, the goddess of death, which obviously there's a connection there.
Yeah, we haven't really understood like who Maevyth's mother is. Like we haven't really been given any inkling towards her actual family and where she belongs aside from Mortasia. So I kind of love that. I kind of love that idea. And I also wonder too if that kind of connection could possibly have to do with her Maevyth possibly being a Lunaseer as well. If Maevyth was the love child of Deimos and Mortasia, I could kind of see that somehow converging to be a thing.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's some stuff with like the warnings, the fact that Maevyth seems to embody or be able to control all of these elements that seem connected to both of them feels like we've been so focused on Mortasia and Deimos being connected to Zevander, which like maybe that's still a thing, but I think it would make like a whole ton of sense if that was all embodied in Maevyth. And I also just selfishly love the idea of her being connected to chaos. Like I want to see the version of Maevyth where chaos reigns.
I love that. We haven't really gotten a lot of clues that Deimos could be manifesting in Zevander, and it could just be that he was cast into the Sable Fire, and the Sable Fire was part of Deimos's struggle as well, and so they have that kind of similarity. So I like that take. I think it is just a little bit different, and we've been like pinpointed into thinking like Deimos, Zevander, right? So I really like the idea that Maevyth could just be like an extension of both of them. And the Sable Fire is what kind of connects her to Zevander.
Yeah. And like, what a move if Mortasia really wants to like exact revenge against whoever it is that took her love away and captured her and all these things, then like, what a beautiful way to do it, to just like amp up that power. I think that connected to that Mortasia is maybe talking about Zevander when she keeps warning Maevyth, because maybe Mortasia knows that there is this connection between Zevander and Cadavros, this like mental bond that we were learning about in this part, and knowing that Cadavros is the god of pestilence. So Zevander is like super vulnerable to Cadavros' powers. And so Mortasia may know that like, even if Zevander has good intentions, he can't really be trusted because his mind is not his own. And Zevander has those fears for himself too, that like he can't trust his own mind and the space that he has been in.
True.
I think that in book 2, Maevyth is going to have to save Zevander again. I think that the trap he fell into in this book is nothing compared to what is to come, and that she is going to have to fully engage her powers in order to save him.
I love that. Yeah, I could totally see that happening. Maybe Zevander will be the damsel in distress.
Like that's the vibe I'm feeling here. I would really love it because like I just feel like Maevyth has been like, oh, I need to save my sister. I need to save my sister. And I'm not mad at her for it, but it's like, it's kind of useless, right? Where like, if she were to have to save Zevander, and Zevander is necessary to this like overarching goal they're trying to achieve, it would be so satisfying to see her really come into her own. You've said a lot about her lacking agency and autonomy, and like that would really give her that moment to figure out what she wants and who she is and what she's capable of.
Totally. I love that.
Okay, mini prediction. I'm pretty sure Aleysia is going to be terrifying, and it is not going to be the beautiful reunion that Maevyth thinks that it's going to be.
Yeah, there was something about her that never really quite sat right.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's weak. Like, I think she just is like has been a weak character that does stupid things, and then Maevyth was like kind of left to figure it out. I just feel like there isn't a scenario where Aleysia got out of the Eating Woods and away from Morose and isn't going to be like a monster of some sort.
I almost wonder if Maevyth is going to have to grapple with, you know, the loss of her sister a second time.
What if she has to kill her?
I wonder if she'll be put into a situation where she has to choose between her new life and her old life, almost like Aleysia being that symbol of her old life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think she's gonna be a wild card, and we just don't know. We don't know.
I'm shocked that they gave us like a look into the basement. I was really afraid that there was going to be this like build up to like the floorboard thing, and it was going to go dark and we were not going to know who was in there.
I was very happy with the end of the book. I will say I was very worried that we were going to get nothing. And so even just getting that like little part with Zevander and Maevyth having their little like smoochy like let's snuggle, let's fuck. Loved that. But then also like we get some sort of like the cliffhanger wasn't awful. It wasn't horrible. It gave us something.
Yeah, like I could sleep at night. I also think it's important to note, because we didn't really get into the details here, like they didn't have sex. They did a lot of other things, but they didn't have sex. So even like the moment where Maevyth talked about this like energy and this feeling tugging at her womb, I was like, oh, is this going to be like the baby?
Yeah, I kind of thought it was the mate bond or something.
That makes sense. Probably energy that like that is to come. I am getting the feeling that there's going to be a war in the next book, and that Anathema was only a taste of the creepy creatures that we are going to see in Eldritch. I just feel like if spiders and like Branimir, branchy monsters and things with hooves and stuff creep you out, like I just have a feeling we're going to get all the monsters of the underworld in Eldritch. I just feel like we're going to get a war and it's going to be dark or a battle or whatever. But I have a feeling there's going to be like blood.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so pumped for it. Even just the name of the book, like Eldritch. Again, I think I talked about this in another episode, but it was in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It was in American Horror Story, The Eldritch Terrors. And the Eldritch Terrors, I believe, are like, I don't know that they're gods, but they're just like, I don't know the different names of them, but I think there's one called like the Returned, the Undead, and they all have like different evil powers. And so I wonder if that's like an emulation of the gods, or like that's maybe like the reference that Keri Lake is making, that they all have all these different powers and threats, and there is going to be a war amongst all of them. So yeah, I love it.
The monsters are slumbering.
Yeah, they're waiting. They're laying in wait.
Let's get into your predictions.
Yes. I love all of them. I think you're onto something here. So I'm excited. So I have a lot of thoughts related to the gods. And within even just the last pages of the book, we had something super critical thrown in front of us that I feel like we need to discuss. And it was that quote, if it's true that he embodies Pistilios, then he yearns for chaos and the power to control life and death. You mentioned it too, Sarah. It feels like there's a really big power play at hand with all of these gods. It sounds to me like Pistilios needs or wants the god of chaos on his side for this next step in his plans. And I just don't think that Mortasia is going to like that. Throughout the book, she's been seen and depicted as trying to protect the natural order of things. We thought maybe what reason would she have to protect the vein of Vivicantum? And there was the Crone Witch alluding to the Corvicae not caring about status and power. And Pistilios and his plans to disrupt the natural process of life in his famine, right? He's trying to disrupt what lives in Mortasia. So Mortasia stands to lose something if he gains control in that way. That's the war that's going to happen, and that Zevander is going to have to fight to decide which side he is going to be on. We're seeing that foreshadowing, right? Zevander may lose control of his sable fire and become more dangerous to Maevyth. If Cadavros continues to target him, Zevander might fall into that darkness or that Caligorya and join forces with him. There's these themes of like rebirth too. Like when Mortasia is talked about, it's not just like darkness. Like it feels like it's the natural order.
Yeah, which makes sense. Like even in the story of like Mortasia and Deimos, again, I caught this kind of on the second read where it talks about how she would follow him around into battle and that no one else would look her in the eye except him. And if you replace the idea of Mortasia with death, then it makes so much sense that, like, of course, death would be wandering through a battlefield and would rarely have someone who's bold enough to look death in the face. It's interesting they like created this bond. I do love this like whole like power position, and it makes me wonder, to your point of like the Corvicae didn't value power or status, but that didn't work for them. Like they lost, and they lost everything. So now if this is their chance, is it like they're not going to make the same mistake again?
I like that too. Little redemption arc.
Yes. Now, I just have to say this quote that you brought up, it kind of stuck for me too. And when I look at it, I feel like the words represent people. It's true that he embodies Pistilios, which is Cadavros. He yearns for chaos, potentially Zevander, Deimos. The power to control life is that Magicae and the alchemy and immortality. And then we have death, which is Mortasia. So we're potentially, again, missing our fertility goddess. But otherwise, it does feel like that is maybe the foreshadowing of like what Cadavros is really seeking to control, which is all of them and the gods that they are embodied by.
That was my like one thing that I couldn't really figure out is how Magicae comes into all of this. We understand that he wants Maevyth because she's the daughter of the Corvicae for the Septimir to drive away Pistilios. But that's all we really know right now. Maybe it's not a matter of like being good or bad, but we don't really know what his motive is aside from that. And like, can Mortasia / Maevyth and Magicae possibly join forces and help to stop Pistilios together? That could be an option. But then the other thing is like, will Mortasia go with her uncle and, family value. Being the goddess of death, join forces with him and just be part of the plague.
If we take any other hints from Greek mythology, family means nothing. So that is the vibe that I'm getting, is like not a positive relationship between those two. But I really love that thought about the possibility of them joining forces. And also it fits very well with the idea that it seems like, the mission that like Dolian and Zevander were focused on, and these mages and how they seem to have the same goal. But I think it would make a ton of sense that they have the same goal with different like motives and end points to that. But that if they were to like unite, they could be the force that could really push Pastilios out of the way potentially. So I hope we get so much of this in the next book that it's just like strategies and gods and wars.
And like the politics behind the whole thing. Keri like did allude to it being a lot about Zevander. So I wonder if we'll get some flashbacks and start to like get some light shed on the reason that he was tortured by the Salassians, why Lady Rydane and Rakaya were taken and what all of that meant. But I know there's got to be more. There's got to be more to this. But I don't feel like I have enough evidence to truly make a call on where Morsana will actually fall into all of this.
We're just going on vibes right now, and we're just guessing the best we can.
No. That's a wrap on our Anathema deep dives, but don't you worry. There is so much more where that came from. We highly recommend checking out our Guide to the Eating Woods and Anathema episode, especially ahead of Eldritch. We covered so much that it's going to be worth going back to some of this content. And as soon as we get an inkling of a date, that we'll be screaming it from the rooftops for Eldritch's release on all of our social channels. So if you're not already, be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcast and social content. And we will be back, baby, as soon as book 2 is here, ready to dive back in and see where our Lady and Lord of Darkness are headed next. So until then, we have so many amazing bookish episodes in the work, and we love having you along for the ride. So please check out our page and read along with us. Would love for you guys to engage. Let us know if you have a book that you want us to cover, or even just have your own thoughts or insights about Anathema. We'll see you next time.